User requests for server connection in JMeter. Now we are focusing on user requests for server connection. User requests for server connection. Here you can see thread group. A thread group defines a pool of users that will execute a particular test case against your server. In the thread group GUI, you can control the number of users simulated, a number of threads, the ramp up time, how long it takes to start all the threads, the number of times to perform the test, and optionally a start and stop time for the test. Here you can see the thread group here. The thread group is connected to server. One user simulates one user request is passed from thread group to server. 20 user simulates 20 user requests is passed from thread group to server. 50 user simulates 50 user requests is passed from thread group to server. 100 user simulates 100 user requests is passed from thread group to server. As an example, we can consider this. This is a screenshot of control panel of HTTP request. The sampler HTTP request. The sampler lets you send an HTTP or HTTPS request to a web server. It also lets you to control whether or not JMeter passes HTML files or for images and other embedded resources and sends HTTP request to retrieve them. Following type of embedded resources are retrieved: images, applets, style sheets, CSS, and resources reference from those files, external scripts, frames, iframes, background images, body, table, TD, and TR, background sound. Here you can see name parameter. This is a descriptive name for this sampler that is shown in the tree. Server, the domain name or IP address of the web server, for example www.example.com. Do not include the HTTP :// prefix. Note, if the host header is defined in the header manager, then this will be used as the virtual host name. Server name is required unless it is provided by HTTP request defaults or a full URL including name, host, and port. Scheme : / host : port is set in path field. Port the web server is listening to default 80. Connection timeout, number of milliseconds to wait for a connection to open. Response timeout, number of milliseconds to wait for a response. Note that this applies to each wait for a response. If the server response is set in several chunks, the overall elapsed time may be longer than the timeout. A duration assertion can be used to detect responses that take too long to complete. In the under HTTP request, the implementation Java or HTTP for client 4, if not specified and not defined by HTTP request defaults, the default depends on the value of the JMeter property JMeter.http sampler. Failing that, the HTTP4 implementation is used. Protocol HTTP, HTTPS or file, default is HTTP. Method get, post, head, trace, options, put, delete, patch, not supported for Java implementation. With HTTP4, the following methods related to web dev are also allowed: copy, lock, mkcol, move, prop find, prop patch, unlock, report, mk calendar, search. More methods can be predefined for the HTTP4 by using JMeter property HTTP sampler.user_define_methods. Content encoding to be used for post, put, patch and file. This is the character encoding to be used and is not related to the content encoding HTTP header. Path, the path to resource, for example /servlets/my-servlet. If the resource required query string parameters, add them below in the send parameters with the request section. As a special case, if the path start with http:// or https://, then this is used as the full URL. And in this case, the server port and protocol fields are ignored. Parameters are also ignored for get and delete. The methods also, please note that the path is not encoded apart from replaces spaces with %20, so unsafe characters may need to be encoded to avoid errors such as URI syntax exception. Here you can see the server proxy, hostname or IP address of a proxy server to perform request. Do not include http:// prefix. Port the proxy server is listening. Username, optional username for proxy server. Password, optional password for proxy server, not this. This is stored encrypted in the test plan. Redirect automatically sets the underlying HTTP protocol handler to automatically follow redirects, so they are not seen by JMeter and thus will not appear as samples. Should only be used for get and get and head requests. The HTTP sampler will reject attempts to use for post and put. Warning, you can also see information on cookie and header handling. follow redirects. This only has any effect if redirect automatically is not enabled. If set, the JMeter sampler will check if the response is a redirect and follow it if we saw. The initial redirect and further responses will appear as additional samples. The URL and data fields of the parent sample will be taken from the final non-redirected sample, but the parent bytes count and elapsed time include all samples. The latency is taken from initial response. Note that HTTP client sampler may log the following message: redirect requested, but follow redirects is disabled. This can be ignored. JMeter will collapse paths of the form /, then / path segment / segment in both absolute and relative redirect URLs. For example, http : // hostname /1 / path segment /2 will be collapsed into http : // host /2. If necessary, this behavior can be suppressed by setting the JMeter property http sampler.redirect removes last ... equal false. Keep alive. JMeter sets the connection keep alive header. This does not work properly with the default HTTP implementation, as connection reuse is not under user control. It does work with Apache HTTP components, HTTP client implementations. Use multipath for mdata for HTTP post. Use multipath for /form data or application / www form URL encoded post requests. Browser compatible headers. When using multipath for /form data, this suppresses the content type and content transfer encoding headers. Only the content disposition header is sent. Send parameters with request. The query string will be generated from the list of parameters you provide. Each parameter has name and value. The options to encode the parameter and an option to include or exclude the equal sign. Some applications don't expect an equal sign where the value is the empty string. The query string will be generated in the correct fashion depending on the choice of method you made. If you choose get or delete, the query string will append to the URL. If post and put, if post or put, then it will be sent separately. Also, if you are sending a file using multipath form, the query string will be created using the multipath form specification. Additionally, you can specify whether each parameter should be URL encoded. If you are not sure what this means, it is probably the best to select it. If your values contain characters such as following, then encoding is usually required. ASCII control characters, non-ASCII characters, reserved characters. URLs use some characters for special use in defining their syntax. when these characters are not used in their special role inside URL, they need to be encoded. Example, $, ampersand, plus, comma, /, colon, semicolon, equal, question sign, ampersand, sign. Unsafe characters. Some characters present the possibility of being misunderstood within URLs for various reasons. These characters should also always be encoded. Example, space, less than, greater than, hash, percentage, etc. Here in the you can see the HTTP request control panel. You can see name and comments. Here you can there are you can see basic and advanced. Under web server you can provide details for server name or IP and port number. Under timeout you can specify connect and response in milliseconds. Under HTTP request you can specify implementation protocol, which is default to HTTP, and method and content encoding. And also you can specify path, and you can see the options for redirect automatically, follow redirects, use keep alive, use multipart, form data for post, and browser compatible headers, and you can see parameters, body data, and files upload. Under send parameter with the request you can see name, value, and encode and include equals, and here you can also see details, add from clipboard, delete, up and down. Under proxy server you can specify server name, IP, port number, username, and password. Here you can see a screenshot of control panel of thread group. A thread group defines a pool of users that will execute a particular test case against your server. In the thread group GUI, you can control the number of users simulated, number of threads, the ramp up time, how long it takes to start all the threads, the number of times to perform the test, and optionally start and stop time for the test. Here you can see these parameters, and this is name attribute, descriptive name for this element that is shown in the tree, and action to be taken after a sampler error determines what happens if a sampler error occurs, either because the sample itself failed or an assertion failed. The possible choices are continue, ignores the error and continue with the test, start next thread loop, ignore the error, start next loop and continue with the test, stop thread, current thread exits, stop test. The entire test is stopped at the end of any current samples. Stop test now. The entire test is stopped abruptly. Any current samples are interrupted if possible. Number of threads, number of users to simulate, this is required. This parameter is required. Ramp up period, how long JMeter should take to get all the threads started. If there are 10 threads and ramp up time of 100 seconds, then each thread will begin 10 seconds after previous thread started, for a total time of 100 seconds to get the test fully up to speed. First thread will always start directly, so if you configured one thread, ramp up time is effectively 0. For the same reason, 10th thread in this example will actually be started after 90 seconds and will and not 100 seconds. The example is actually not shown here. We have to consider the situation we discussed before, that if there are 10 threads and ramp up time is of 100 seconds, then each thread will begin 10 seconds after the previous thread started. That was the example we are talking about. And here you can see loop count, number of times to perform the test case. Alternatively, infinite can be selected, causing the test to run until manually stopped or end of the thread lifetime is reached. This number of thread is a required parameter, and ramp up time, period is also a required parameter. This loop count also is also required unless infinite is selected. Here delay thread creation until needed. If selected, threads are created only when the appropriate proportion of the ramp up time has elapsed. This is most appropriate for tests with a ramp up time that is significantly longer than the time to execute a single thread. That is where earlier threads finish before later ones start. If not selected, all threads are created when the test starts. They then pause for the appropriate proportion of the ramp up time. This is the original default and is appropriate for tests where threads are active throughout most of the test. Specify thread lifetime. If selected, confines thread operation time to the given bounds. These two parameters are also required parameters. Duration in seconds. If the scheduler checkbox is selected, one can choose retrieve end time. JMeter will use this to calculate the end time. Startup delay. If the scheduler checkbox is selected, one can choose a relative startup delay. JMeter will use this to calculate the start time. Here you can see the screenshot of the control panel of thread group. Here you can see your name and comments. Under action to be taken after a sampler error, you can select continue, startup, next thread loop, stop thread, stop thread, and stop test, or stop test now. Under thread properties, you can specify number of threads, users, ramp up time period in seconds, loop count, and you can also select infinite here, and you can also select a sample user on each iteration, delay thread creation until needed, and specify thread lifetime. And you can also see duration in seconds and startup delay in seconds here. Now we are considering adding default HTTP request properties in building a web test plan. Here you can see the HTTP defaults for our test plan. Now that we have in the moment defined the users, it is time to define the task that they will be performing. Here you will specify the default settings for your HTTP request, and then you will add HTTP request elements which use some of the default settings you specified here. Begin by selecting the JMeter users thread group element. Click on your right mouse button and to get the add menu, then select add, then config element, then HTTP request defaults, then select this new element to view its control panel. Like most element, HTTP request default control panel has a name field that you can modify. In this example, leave this field with the default value. Skip the next field, which is a web service server name or IP. For test plan that you are building, all HTTP requests will be sent to the same web server, jmeter.apache.org. Enter this domain name into the field. This is only field that we will specify a default to leave the remaining fields with their default values. The HTTP request default element does not tell JMeter to send an HTTP request. It simply defines the default values that the HTTP request element use. This figure for the completed HTTP request default element. Now we are considering adding HTTP requests. Here you can see the HTTP request for JMeter homepage. In our test plan, we need to make two HTTP requests. The first one is for the JMeter homepage, http://jmeter.apache.org, and the second one is for the changes page, http://jmeter.apache.org/ changes.html. JMeter send the request in order that they appear in the tree. Start by adding the first HTTP request to the JMeter users element. Add, then sampler, then HTTP requests. Then select HTTP request element in the tree and edit the following properties. Change the name field to homepage. 2. Set the path field to /. Remember that you do not have to set the server name field because you already specified this value in the HTTP request default element. Here you can see HTTP request for JMeter homepage. Next, add the second HTTP request and edit the following properties. See the figure here. First, change the name field to changes and set the path to / changes.html. Here you can see HTTP request for the JMeter changes page. Now we are considering adding JDBC requests in building a database test plan. Here you can see the JDBC request for the first SQL request. After defining the users, it's time to define the task that they will be performing. In this here you will specify JDBC requests to perform. Begin by selecting JDBC users element. Click your right mouse button to get the add menu and then select add, then config element, then JDBC configuration, then select this new element to view its control panel. You can see the figure here. This is the JDBC configuration. Set up the following field. This assume we will be using MySQL database called Cloud. The variable name here my database bound to pool. This need to uniquely identify the configuration. It is used by JDBC sampler to identify the configuration to be used. JDBC URL database URL, that's the JDBC /MySQL / IP of the server for colon 3306 / cloud. JDBC driver name, that's com.mysql.jdbc.driver. Username, the username of the database, and password for the database, password for the username. The other fields on the screen can be left as default. JMeter creates the database connection pool with the configuration settings. As is specified in the control panel. The pool is referred in the JDBC request in the variable name. Variable name field. Several different JDBC configuration elements can be used, but they must have unique names. Every JDBC request must refer to a JDBC configuration pool. More than one JDBC request can refer to the same pool. Selecting the JDBC users element again. Click your right mouse button to get add menu, and then select add, then sampler then JDBC request, then select this new element to view its control panel. In our test plan, we make two JDBC requests. First one is for the select all running VM instances. And the second is to select expunging. And expunging VM instance, obviously you should change these two examples appropriate for your particular database. This illustrated here. JMeter sends request in the order that you add them to the tree. Start by editing the following properties here. Change the name to VM running. Enter the pool name. My database. Same as in the configuration element. Enter the SQL query string field. Enter the parameter values field with the running value, and enter the parameter types with varchar. This figure, you can see here JDBC request for the first SQL request. Next, add the second JDBC request and edit the following properties here. Change the name to VM expunging, and change the variable value of parameter values to expunging. Here you can see the JDBC request for the second request. Now we are considering adding default FTP request properties in building an FTP test plan. Here you can see the defaults for our test plans. Now we have, after defining the users, it's time to define the task that they will be performing. In here you will specify the default settings for your FTP request, and then you will add FTP request element which use some of the default settings you specified here. Begin by selecting the FTP users element. Click your right mouse button to get the add menu, and then select add, then config element, then FTP request default, then select this new element to view its control panel. Like most JMeter element, FTP request default control panel has the name field that you can modify. In this example, leave this field with the default value. Skip the next field, which is skip to the next field, which is FTP server name or IP. For the test plan that you are building, all FTP requests will be sent to the same FTP server, ftp.domain.com. In this case, enter this domain name into the field. This is the only field that we will specify a default, so leave the remaining fields with their default values. FTP request default element does not tell JMeter to send FTP request. It simply defines the default values that the FTP request elements use. Here you can see the completed FTP request default element. Now we are considering adding FTP requests. In our test plan, we need to make two FTP requests. JMeter send requests in the order that they appeared in the tree. Start by adding the first FTP request to the FTP users element. Add, then sampler, then FTP request. Then select the FTP request element in the tree and edit the following properties. Change the name to file1. Change the remote file field to /directory /file1.txt. Step 3, then change the username field to anonymous and change the password field to for example anonymous at test.com. You do not have to set the server name field because you already specified this value in the FTP request default element. Here you can see the FTP request for file 1. Next, add the second FTP request and edit the following properties. See the figure here. Change the name to file 2 to change the remote file field name, remote file field to /directory /file2.txt. 3, change the username field to anonymous. 4, change the password field to anonymous at test.com. Here you can see the FTP request for file 2. Now we are considering adding LDAP request defaults in building an LDAP test plan. Begin by selecting LDAP users element. Here you can see LDAP default for our test plan. Begin by selecting LDAP users element. Click your right mouse button to get add menu, then select add, then config element, then LDAP request defaults. Then select this new element to view its control panel. Like most JMeter elements, LDAP request defaults control panel has a name field that you can modify. In this example, leave this field with the default value. Here you can see LDAP default for our test plan. Enter DN field to your LDAP root distinguish name. Enter LDAP server name field to ldap.test.com port to 389. These values are default for the LDAP requests. Now we are considering adding LDAP requests. Here you can see LDAP request for inbuilt add test. In our test plan, we need to make your 4 LDAP request: inbuilt add test, inbuilt search test, inbuilt modify test, inbuilt delete test. JMeter send request in the order that you add them to the tree. Start by adding the first LDAP requests to the LDAP users element. Add, then sampler then LDAP requests. Select then the LDAP request element in the tree and edit the following properties. 1, rename to the add this element. Select add test radio button in test configuration group. This figure shows the LDAP request for inbuilt add test. You do not have to set the server name field, port field, username, password and DN, because you already specified this value in the logging config element and the LDAP request defaults. Next, add the second LDAP request and edit the following properties. One, rename it to search and select this search test radio button in the test configuration group. Next, add the third LDAP request and edit the following properties. First, one, rename to the modify this element and select modify test radio button in the test configuration group. Next, add the fourth LDAP requests and edit the following properties. Rename to here you can see LDAP request for inbuilt for inbuilt delete test, and here the rename to delete element here and select the delete test radio button in the test configuration group. Now we are considering adding LDAP extended request default in building an extended LDAP test plan. Here you can see the LDAP default for our test plan. Begin by selecting LDAP ext users element. Click your right mouse button to get the add menu, then select add, then config element, then LDAP extended request default, then select this new element to view its control panel. Like most JMeter elements, LDAP extended request defaults control panel has a name field that you can modify. In this example, leave this field with the default value. Here you can see LDAP default for our test plan. For each of the element of the different operations, some default values can be filled in. In all cases, when the default is filled in, this is used for the LDAP extended request. For each request, you can override the default by filling the default values in the LDAP extended request sampler. When no value is entered which is necessary for a test, the test will fail in an unpredictable way. We will not enter any default values here as we will build a very small test plan, so we will explain all different fields when we add the LDAP extender samplers. So in this example, we are considering only adding LDAP extended request only. Now we are considering adding a thread bind request in adding LDAP requests. Here you can see a thread bind example. Here first rename element 1 dot thread bind to select the thread bind button here. Enter the hostname value for LDAP server in the server name field. For enter the port number from the LDAP server 636 LDAP over SSL in the port field. 5 optional enter the base DN in the DN field. This base DN will be used as the starting point for searches, add delete, etc. Take care that this must be the uppermost shared level for all your requests. For example, when all information is stored under OU equal users and DC equal test, and DC equal com, you can use this value in the base DN. Step 6 is optional. Enter the distinguished name for the user you want to use for authentication. When this field is kept empty, an anonymous bind will be established. Optional S7 optional enter the password for the user you want to authenticate with. An empty password will also lead to an anonymous bind. Step 8 optional, enter the value for the connection timeout LADP. Number 9 optional, check the box to use the secure LADP protocol. If you access with LDAP over SSL, LDAPS. Number 10 optional, check the box trust all. If you want the client to trust all certificates. Here you can see a thread bind example here. Now we are considering adding web service adding web service request in building a web service test plan in user manual building WS test. Here the web service request. In our test plan we will use the .NET web service. Since you are using a web service sampler, we won't go into the default wiring web service in this example. If you don't know how to write a web service, Google for web service and familiarize yourself with writing web services for Java and .NET. It should not be there. It should be noted there is a significant difference between how .NET and Java implement web services. .NET web services are document centric, whereas Java web services tend to be RPC centric. Neither approach is perfect and each has limitations. JMeter send requests in the order that they appeared in the tree. Start by adding a sampler web service SOAP request beta go to a Jakarta users element, add, then sampler, then web service SOP request, it's a beta code. Then select web service request element in the tree and edit the following properties. Change the name field to web service SOAP request. Enter the WSDL URL and click load WSDL. Here you can see web service request. If the WSDL file was loaded correctly, the web methods drop down should be populated. If the drop down element remained blank, it means there was a problem getting WSDL. You can test the WSDL using browser that reads XML. For example, if you are testing an IIS web service, the URL would look like this: http:// localhost / mice web service / service dot asmx (WSDL). Next, select the web method and click configure. The sampler should populate the URL and SOAP action. SOAP action web fields. Assuming the WSDL is valid, the correct SOAP action should be entered. The last step is to paste the SOAP message in the SOAP or XML RPC data text area. You can optionally save the SOAP message to a file and browse to the location. For convenience, there is a third option of using message folder. The sampler will randomly select files from a given folder and use the text for the SOAP message. An important note in the sampler, it will automatically use the proxy host and port passed to the JMeter from the command line. If the fields in the sampler are left blank, if the sampler has values in the proxy host and port text field, it will use the ones provided by the user. If no host or port are provided, JMeter wasn't started with the command line option, the sampler will fail silently. This behavior may not be what users expect. As an exception example, we can consider this one. Response code, non-HTTP response code, org.apache.http.conn.http host connection exception, response message, non-HTTP response message connect to proxy.usb.com :8080 proxy.usb.com /91.195.240.126 failed connection timeout connect. As an error example, we can consider this one. Error requests are not logged in the server for load test in JMeter with 1000 users. Now this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for watching it.